Um, so we have the PAs, and I think what we want to have in this session is to get from all of you your brief, basic reflections about what you've seen, what you've heard, and any advice that you might have for the wider group. We know that you've all spoken to your individual researchers who are under your supervision, but it would be really beneficial to also share some of those thoughts with the rest of us. So if that's okay with you, I would first like to go with Jehu. Jehu is first on our list. And then please share with us, Jehu, and Jehu has a cold and has maybe some health issues that may take him away from us later on. But let's begin with Jehu, and then we move on from there. About 10 minutes or so, Jehu, if you have.
All right. Thank you, Retief. I hope you can hear me. My voice is heavy. I have a heavy cold and a cough. I think the first thing to say is this has been a hugely successful event. Retief, Afe, Nelly, you did a tremendous job. I can only imagine all the effort and planning and you know, attention to details that was required to pull this off. You know, starting with the assumption will be in person and you know, sort of translating all of that to an online, you know, a Zoom option. That takes great planning and insight and understanding. As Joel said earlier, it's been a veritable intellectual feast, and it's been a joy to be present, to listen, to you know, listen to the presentations, the interactions, the questions, and in my case, every now and then, of course, pose a question. So this has been tremendous. I would want to make a few practical suggestions moving forward, and also one or two recommendations. The plenary speakers came well prepared, and you know, they used their time wisely. What they put on the table in terms of ideas, coverage, scope, questions, approaches, and issues have benefited the guarantees tremendously. Even the most experienced of them found something of huge value to take away. But I would say going forward, however, for these kinds of programs, somebody made the question in the earlier session, we need a few bios. Those who chaired the sessions presented the bios of the plenary speakers, but I think those should have been available already in the program for everybody to see, and that would have made it easier. I struggle with the fact that we did not have the topics of the plenary sessions ahead of time. There may be behind the scenes reasons for that, but I think it makes quite a bit of a difference when we can look at the program and have some sense of the topics or issues that each plenary is going to cover. I missed that, and I think again, I'm sure there are partly reasons for this. So I'm aware. I'm not saying anything that is you know, wouldn't be obvious, but I think we shouldn't undervalue what it means to look at a program and know ahead of time what a speaker is going to be addressing in terms of topic and issues. I'm a trained historian, so I was really eager to listen to Adesina. He presented a lot. That's again, we're talking about very substantive, very interesting, you know, broad assessment and analysis that are of great value. However, and maybe this is just my bias, I think we missed out on the socio-historical approach for two reasons. First, because the socio-historical approach is bottom up. So that aligns very well with guarded theology in some ways. And as he himself said earlier today, a socio-historical approach basically emphasizes the fact that marginalized populations, those who are people who are out of power, those whose voices are typically not represented in official sources, are should equally be understood as being agents of historical transformation. And so just on that point alone, you can see that that would have added, he did a tremendous job. I mean, I want to be clear about that. But a socio-historical approach, I think, probably should have been included and maybe be included going forward. I want to end with what I think we covered a lot, so you can't cover everything. And this my next and last point has to do with the practicalities that we must, I think, continue to wrestle with in a program and that emphasizes realities. So we've talked a little bit about the unpredictable implications of the COVID and doing research in a pandemic environment. I have to say, I really became preoccupied with that. And this is a bit of a confession. I became preoccupied with that to the extent that I lost sight of the fact that the African context is fraught with crises and challenges. I mean, to the point that one of the reasons that experts give for why sometimes even vaccination efforts, when the vaccines are present, which is not often, why those struggle, it's because of what they call public fatigue, which is to say that for the average African, navigating a normal day requires often dealing with one crisis or the other, one challenge or the other, and layers and layers of things to navigate, and adding trying to get a vaccine in the mix can be for some people just one thing too many. I say that to say that there are exigencies of research we didn't touch on, and hopefully we'll pick this up in future workshops. But what does it mean? And this came up when I was talking with my am I out of time? Oh, I'm sorry. This came up in my own discussions with my teams. Doing research in context of insecurity and instability, and I don't mean that there's active insecurity, but just with that sense that you never know from one day to the other, what the availability of respondents will be, what the circumstances of interaction and so on would be like. What does that do for research? How does the researcher operate in those kinds of environments? And of course, Anne would have been, she touched on that a little bit, but I think we need to get down to practicalities for our researchers. And then the ethics of research, I would love to see that covered in a little bit more detail. Jim touched on this also, but the African situation does present its own unique challenges. There's some situations where people won't show up if you don't provide incentives for them to show up. At what point does that become a problem? Can you pay respondents? Can you provide these incentives? And what does that mean for your research and for the outcomes? To what extent do you end up outsourcing elements of your project in a way that can be counterproductive because you don't have access, because the gatekeepers are a problem, and maybe you need somebody else to take the photos, you need somebody else to ask the questions and give you that information. But the fact that you're not doing it yourself means that there's there will be all kinds of gaps and missing pieces and so on. What does that mean for our research? So I think those issues of the practicalities of doing research in an African environment. We covered a lot of those, but I think there's still more to take on, especially in terms of the ethics of research, which I suspect we will be turning to in the future. I have to stop there. My voice is going anyway, so.
Well, thank you very much, Jehu. We appreciate it. I know you're not feeling well, so but thanks for those points you raised. Very important issues you raised for our the project and the workshop, as well as in terms of our future planning for how to do this. So those are well noted. And in terms of the questions you raised, thank you very much for that as well. I think these are for the researchers, especially some of these issues that you just recently raised about ethics and so on. Well, probably there aren't any clear-cut answers to many of them, and I would encourage all of the researchers, the grantees, to just be in correspondence with your PAs all the time about these issues from now on further. But take note of the questions and engage with them as different challenges arise across your horizon in the next few years. So next up, the program has Damaris next up, but Henrietta's asked that she goes next, if that's fine, because of her internet connection. So if that's okay with you, let's hear from Henrietta next, and hopefully that works well. Thanks.
Oh, excuse me, my voice is also crazy. So I'll turn on my video, but if I'm losing it, then I'll turn it off again. So thank you so much for this workshop. It has not only been beneficial for the grantees, but as a PA, I think I've benefited a lot from it. And it has kind of settled some doubts in my own research and questioned some other issues in my own research. And I really want to thank the organizers of this research, Retif, this workshop, Retif, Afe, Nelly, and the research associates. In fact, it has really been good, other than the internet that has been a bit of a challenge for some of us here. So I think having this virtual program gave reasons for all the team members to participate in this research, which would not have been possible if we have had an in-person meeting, and that has really been a plus. And so my suggestion would be, in future, could we consider a hybrid session for the other team members who are unable to come? Because I think the material that we have all had, it wouldn't have been possible for the PIs to convey this message, or even just for them to read the information and grasp what has been said and the interaction that has emerged as a result. So it would really be great if in future we consider a hybrid session to grant every person means of participation. But also the challenges are real, they are there, the challenges of internet connection, which I'm facing now. They are telling me again, my internet is unstable. So I'd rather go off quickly before I go. So the challenges are real, but a hybrid session would be very good. And my take home from all the presenters, it was really good, well prepared. Some issues were stressed on a lot. I may have missed it, I'm not sure, I don't know, but James spoke a lot on the essence of doing research methods, but I think also what we have not really taken on board as researchers is the notion of visual methods. I know in one of his, one of the papers he sent, there was literature on visual methods. It is really important for us to take that on board as a serious methodology that could be used, not only using pictures to illustrate, but actually using pictures as a way of analyzing data. In addition to that, when we use pictures as a way of analyzing data, we empower our informants. They become the teacher, the teachers. Collier has always asked the question, do pictures lie? Yes, they may, and no, they may not. But 95%, they don't lie. When you place a picture in front of somebody and ask that person to tell you the story of that picture, you'll find out that the information you glean from that picture from the informant gives you an in-depth historical and archival information that otherwise you would not have gotten that information. So I think going forward, we should really include visual methods in our methodology workshop as a means of data collection. And then coming also to the issue of our realities, one of the things I missed was not only how do we work with ICTs in these challenging times in Africa with different networks that are giving us problems, but how do we also use ICTs as methodological tools? How do we work with them? How can we, especially now in the time of pandemic, in the time of insecurity, how do we draw on this? For instance, we are all gathered here on Zoom and we are doing this, but going forward, how do the grantees use the ICTs in case of plan B, as we'll be told? We need a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. If we need to employ that plan B and it is ICTs, how are they effectively going to use it to bring out meaningful data that they can interpret and that they can work with? So I think that would also be something to look into, to get someone who has really worked on that to talk to us on that issue. And with this regard, I had asked a question to the Mozambican team because I am a bit conversant following, given the SADC region, we know what is happening in Mozambique. And I'd asked the question, going forward, how do they plan to carry their research in case the war flares up in Mozambique? We know what the Boko Haram is, no, it's not Boko Haram, I think Al-Qaeda is doing there. So what happens to that team that they are unable to go to the field? This is when they would need to draw on those tools of ICTs and other tools to effectively carry out research. And on the whole, after this, with the group sessions with my groups, it was really good in the sense that I met all three groups at the same time, and talking with all of them, we were able to identify the cross-pollination that can happen within the groups. And that is something that has really emerged in my group, and they are taking it seriously. For instance, the Ghana team is already has identified what they can work with the Nigerian team, which is good. And I think that is something that the rest of the group should really take seriously. What are the spaces of convergence? What are the issues that they can talk about? When Bruce talked to us, was it Bruce? No, when Derek talked to us, he talked about the issue of incompleteness and the issue of conviviality. And I think we shouldn't just come and go back into our silos and stay there and begin to work individually. The material, the data that we generate, we need to start corroborating with others and to see how we can complete each other, complement each other, and come out with more enriching data that speak to one another than speak individually. Then when it comes to the issue, the historical data, the historical presentation by Dr. Adesina, that was really great as well. And I would have loved to hear more how to analyze the data you get from the archives. It's one thing going to the archives, but how do you read into them? What meaning do you attribute to them? And how do you corroborate it with the facts that you get from the field? So that would be something that we need more information on it, especially someone like me coming from an anthropological background who rarely goes into the archives. And when I go, I need somebody to help me with that information. So I think it would be good to have to understand how to read that material from the archives against the backdrop of what you have brought out from, or you've discovered from the field. But on the whole, the lectures were really good, very enriching, very interactive, and I must applaud the speakers as they came in really well prepared. Let me leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Henrietta. And in spite of your internet connection, I think it's we heard you quite clearly. We didn't see you in the latter part, but that's fine. Although it's not fine, you know, you talked about the visual turn, and we're missing that visual right now. But in any case, we heard you very well, and I think you brought across some really important points, both for us and for the researchers. Please hang on in the online. Hopefully, we'll have you available later on for some Q&A, if that's possible for you. But in the meantime, let's just move on to Damaris next. Damaris Parsitau, if you could please share your thoughts.
Thank you. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good night, everyone. Like everyone else, I have been reflecting about this conference since its very beginning to the tail end of it. And I think we've had a really stimulating, interactive, and really wonderful conference with a powerful and good selection of speakers. And so I think it's really been beneficial, not just for the grantees, but also for myself and everybody else here. We have all soaked in all the knowledge, all the perspectives, all the skills, and all the tools that have been given to us. Having said that, I would like, first of all, to give a shout out to the conference facilitators, the people behind the scene, Nelly, the engine behind everything, the facilitators, the translators. I think a lot of work has gone into the planning, even just the thoughtfulness of, how to organize, the speakers and who to invite, and just so much thought, so much planning, so much energy has gone into this, and we do not take that for granted. And we are absolutely grateful that you could plan such a seamless workshop, despite the the issues with technology. I think it's been a very smooth conference and really very well organized. So thank you, everyone. I want to just point to a few, and of course, despite the seamlessness of the conference, I found myself really wishing that this was a physical conference. I just really feel that I thrive in community, and Zoom doesn't grant community, although I don't need a visa to be in Zoom. Like, I just got denied a visa to the US because Kenya has been slapped with a travel advisory. So this is our new reality, and but I still really find myself craving, for communality. I crave going out to eat good food in Cape Town and going by the beach. So I'm really praying and holding space that the next one will be a good thing, that we'll be able to meet physically, just like we have done before. Let me just say that I was just blown away by every speaker. The facilitators did such a great job to bring everyone, and I think Jim speaker for me, I think set the tone for the conference by giving us, terrific sociological, anthropological tools for doing grounded theology and ethnography. Also, and I think the highlight for me was his conversations around social locations and power dynamics and the elements of surprise in the field and how we engage fieldwork and the communities we study. And thank you, Jim. I thoroughly enjoyed that. Bruce Stephen's personal story sparked tremendous conversations around the many and sometimes multiple pathways of rethinking grounded theology and grounded theory. And as one leader from Zimbabwe, whom I advised, told me personally that he felt that Bruce's sharing of his own very personal story and how he used that, to just, everyone had this spark in their minds on how the many themes that just emerged from that story. He told me that that story changed his life, and he believes that it has changed how he's going to do theology going forward. So thank you, Bruce, for really that powerful story. And I think it goes, to tell us just the power of our own stories in doing theology and theological education in Africa. And my friend Anne Kubai, I keep telling everyone that I could listen to Anne Kubai all my life. She's just the kind of person I want to go for coffee with. I want to buy her lunch and dinner and tea and more coffee and everything, and have conversations with her. Her stories, I think, are really enriching, and her experiences, and sometimes her experiences are quite painful when she speaks about her positionality, and even the kind of experiences, painful experiences that she encounters when she goes to the field. But I think what spoke to me mostly was ethnography and the intersections between that and how all these intersections come in between theology and gender and race and class and disability and all. But more importantly, I think I like how she engages all her senses, the power of smell, the power of listening, the power of in fact, her famous quote is listening to silence. And I think for me, that comes out very powerfully, that there are things you see in the field and internalize just by employing your many senses. So thank you very much, and thank you for speaking about intersectionality. I've always thought of intersectionality. I use it in much of my work as someone who teaches gender, and but it just didn't come to me the way it did when you shared that story. And Professor Tayo, I just like Jim, I was just saying yes, because my first degree is in history. And so I found myself really at home with that. And for me, the takeaway is that it just sparked conversation on how we can employ historical tools in analyzing our theology. And I think I took away that the Bible is primarily a historical document. I'm not a theologian, and my grantees told me to stop saying that because everyone is a theologian in their eyes. But I never really looked at the Bible that way. And so thank you, Professor, for the tools that you granted, not just the grantees, but also myself. And lastly, Derek Lemon dialogues between anthropology and theology was a real lemonade, and I think resonated with many people like myself who study evangelicals and politics and the nexus between prophecy and politics. And I think that resonated with so many people, and want to thank you for that. I want to speak about two or three things that stood out for me. And one of the things that stood out for me, I think, is that this conference generated tremendous conversations. It's been a conversation starter. And I think these conversations are going to go a long way, not just in how we do this kind of research, but I think it's going to shape current and future theological discourses and engagements in Africa. I also think that the conference generated, the conversations generated will continue to spark action and social transformation, and not just in theological education in Africa, but also challenges how we do theology, how we engage Christian communities, and how we impact the communities we work with. And I think somebody spoke about the need for our research and our engagement to inform policy. And because I love that, that sparked something in me. So I think the grantees have been very well equipped to go to the field with every manner of tool, sociological tools, anthropological tools, historical tools, and theological tools. And I think if that was the objective of this workshop, I think that has been achieved quite very well. And I'm grateful for that. And I hope that these conversations that have been sparked and continues, to in generations to come. Another thing that I think stood out for me is the need for curriculum development for the 21st century, and curriculum development that is shaped by the realities that we face, particularly the COVID-19 pandemic that I think we are going to grapple with for a very long time. I keep remembering that we are still writing on HIV/AIDS nearly 30 years since the first case was found in Africa, and people are still talking about that because it just had just tremendous impact on societies. And that's exactly what COVID has done. And we have not even begun to think about its unprecedented impact on every aspect of our lives. But also how do we do theology with just tremendous realities that we grapple with, and how does theology speak to our various, and urgent issues like climate change, like environmental degradation and issues, violence, war, security, gender and sexual-based violence, and its intersections with patriarchy, sexism, class, disability and identities, and poverty, disease and pandemics, and more importantly, the current thing that we are grappling with, vaccine shortage and vaccine hesitancy, and the politics and the geopolitics around that. So even as we think about curriculum, particularly for the grantees, we need to, to be alive to all these challenges, and how, what we have learned can spark conversations around every of those major themes. Lastly, I want to speak about a few gaps that I think we could probably rethink in our next, workshop. We might need to rethink about new research methodologies for grounded theology in the age of COVID-19. As I said before, that COVID-19 is a big deal and is going to shape how we do many things going forward. And I think we need to understand how do we do this in the age of a pandemic like this whose impact is going to go on for a very long time. I think I don't have anything else to say, so if I have more minutes, I'll yield them back to the facilitator. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Damaris, for those thoughts. Very, very insightful and helpful for us as we go forward. And let's return to some of those later on. For now, let's move over to Mwenda and Ntarangwi. I mispronounced your name there, but sorry.
Thank you, Retief. And the danger of speaking last is everybody has given the best advice, and you're left to piece together things that may not even be remembered. But I also join my colleagues in thanking the Nagel Institute. I know there was a colleague who was in one of the programs that is hosted by the Nagel Institute and went and found out that there were only 3 people in the office. She was expecting about 15 people who can make this project run. And she was shocked. She said, "Is this it? This is it?" Yes. And again, they pulled off a great event, despite the quick turnaround from ability to meet in the usual form as a brother talked about. And here we are, finding even good things to talk about in terms of Zoom meetings. And for me, it is actually the possibilities and the abilities to go back to the conversations because they were recorded, and catching some of the things that you had missed because your internet was failing, and being able to reflect on what others are doing. So thank you, Retief, thank you, Afe, thank you, Nelly, and your able team. For me, I reflect on, I was just realizing that I actually was involved in the project maybe since 2013, and I have seen the way it has evolved. Joel shared his epiphany when we were talking about our theological moments. And he talked about the need to turn the eye of theology from the Western location to the greater majority world. And I've challenged my colleagues who I happen to have the privilege of advising to think of how they can sit at the table of theological conversations. And they are sitting at the table as equal participants and contributors. And they should be proud of the fact that their work has been selected out of many, many others, and that they are representing those that did not get the grants, because they too wanted to participate in this. I also mentioned that research and writing seeks to fill gaps. In this case, we have a collective responsibility to fill the gap of not enough theological studies coming out of Africa and hitting the mainstream. And that is why we have such a great team of people located in various places, people who are already in influential positions in terms of journals and publications that will help spread the tentacles of many of our colleagues here, because that is what is needed. If we do not read about the experiences and expressions of our brothers and sisters in these other parts, how can we understand such a global phenomenon as Christianity or religion? It is important that we make this not just a personal project, but a project for Africa. And thank you, Joel, for that epiphany you had that brought us back to this continent. I know a small project like this has such ripple effect across the institutions where the students and lecturers are located, as well as the students that they will teach and those that will study there. So thank you for that. And let me remind us that we are in this together. I was reminded of an Australian woman who has been cited a lot of times because she says, and I quote, I may add a few words there, "If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your theology, your destiny, and your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." That's Lillian Watson. We are bound together because Christianity is part of all of us. Theology is part of all of us. No one has the corner office on what is happening. We are in this together because as we work together, we become a better team. And I wanted to ask us a few questions. And how do we begin to respect different and diverse sources of knowledge, ways of knowing, as well as modes of capturing and writing about that reality? And we've talked a lot in this workshop about those realities. And I think the beauty of having this grounded theology, grounded theory, is that it takes the so-called little people seriously. And it takes what is happening on the ground seriously. I was reminded of the many critiques that have been labeled against anthropologists being a colonial handmaiden and all that. But I want to say that it is actually anthropologists who had the audacity to take the forgotten seriously. That's how we have some major works like the work of Marcel Mauss on the gift and exchange. We have that beautiful piece on the Dogon diviner Ogotomeli, who was taken seriously, and that his own recollection of his philosophies among the Dogon can actually become something that is important. So how do we, as researchers, take seriously the works and the thoughts and the things that others are doing? And I also reminded my team that the people we are working with are also observing and learning or even studying us. And I gave them the example. I was reviewing a project in Southern Sudan for a friend of mine, actually a former student of mine. And I realized that the people that were there had known what each program leader or program director wanted. They knew they wanted data from the village. And so they said, you know what, we know what World Vision is looking for. So they give World Vision what they want. What does CARE International want? What does Help the Children? You know, all this. And they say, oh, we know what they want, because they have come with their own clipboards full of the information they're looking for. They have not sat to ask us what we want. And so we give them the information, they give us rice and beans, and they go and we stay and do the things that are important to us. Grounded theory allows you to start asking the questions that itch the people that you're with. And I know some of us have had trouble sort of figuring out, how do I go without, you know, fully conceptualizing what I want to ask and the things I want to do. What many of people say anthropologists do, that they just hang out and they catch some things out here and you see, oh, this is a serious event. But it is actually a wonderful method of study, because the minute people think you do not have an agenda and you want to sit at their feet to learn from them, that opens doors, that creates some level of trust that may be something that you want to do. I also wanted to share a little bit about why I think this particular session of NEGO's projects was so important. And again, it is the fact that it's not only asking us to generate theory and the studies from the ground up, but also it is continuing with the requirement that we include whatever we have in developing curriculum. Many projects come and go, but when you have an opportunity to develop the next and the next cadre of scholars through theological schools, through religious studies programs, then whatever you're doing now endures. And that has been such a big plus for, I think, the project that NEGO has been sponsoring and helping to work with. How do you develop curriculum? And it's always important to start from the beginning, thinking about curriculum design, curriculum revamping, curriculum introduction of new things, because then you can already signal to the people that make decisions about curriculum that this is something that you are intending to do. And I wish that all projects would have that component in it. And let me assure our colleagues who are grantees that the piece you'll do for NEGO will be just a third, probably an eighth of the work that you'll continue to do. NEGO has opened up a window for you. You will meet, of course, the obligations of the publications you need, but this is a kind of project that you can develop a whole career on, because you have now networks of probably 12, 14, 15 other scholars around the continent that can work with you on similar issues, and you can do a lot of comparative work. So feel encouraged, and I'm looking forward to that, what we call the face-to-face method, as well as the virtual one, which actually complements what we're doing. And now, to be provocative, how will your work help in decolonizing theology, de-Westernizing the study of African modes of expression of Christianity. When we can find that, we have entered into the world of our colleagues who are doing this in their own places, Jehu and Afe, looking at diaspora studies and the way Christians interact, and some of the cutting edge work that we see in other disciplines. The fact that you had so many disciplines represented here is an invitation to think broadly about how do we put the African at the center of discussions and theorizing of theology in Africa. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to a continued communication and work with the teams that I'm advising. Thank you. Latif?
Thank you so much, Mwenda, and everyone, all of you. Those are excellent comments and questions and issues that you raise at this point in time. So we have a few minutes then before we have to break again. Let's see if, let me see what the questions are in the chat, and no doubt we'll not be able to come to everything at this point. But there are some questions and a lot of comments actually, and I encourage you all to look at the comments in the chat, and there is some comments in Portuguese there as well. So is it Edson who's making a comment there? If Edson, if you don't mind, would you unmute yourself and just speak what you've written there in Portuguese, and then the interpreters will translate for us, if that's possible for you.
Please go to the interpretation and choose channel English.
Yes, is Edson still available to speak? I don't see him.
Eu estou. Hello?
Hello, is it Edson?
Sim. Yes, I'm here, but my network is not okay. So
Okay.
it is not a problem. I will ask you to read for me, please.
Right, I'm going to ask Denise or Juliana to please read that if it's possible for either of you to do that.
Yes, we will do that now. And so he says, fortunately, it is not the whole country that is in conflict. We hope that with God's help, this will just be over. Anyway, this is a challenge that we need to pay attention to. We need to reflect well on it, especially if we consider the more differentiated academic level of the potential participants involved in the research.
Thank you. So it seems to me that's a comment and one well noted. Thank you. Unless any of you want to respond to that. But let me just read some of the other questions, and then you all can think about it and see if anybody wants to respond to these. Many of them are not directed at one particular person, but for example, I see here a question from Akin Mayowa, who's saying, what is African Christian theology? Why not African theology? That's a good one, and yeah, an important one with I suspect a long answer. Then there is also a question from Felix to this to Mwenda. Any idea about how the decolonial program can progress? How key do you think this is for African theology, and why? And yeah, and then there are some other comments and so on, but those are the the questions that I can see at this point, unless I'm missing anything. Not seeing anybody's hand raised. But yeah, so let's see if anybody wants to respond to that. Mwenda, there's one specifically for you, so maybe you could go first.
Let me go first. I'll even try the hard one, even though I'm not a theologian. The African Christian theology, assuming that Christianity is a religion as much as Islam, as much as African traditional religion, and theology is a study of how that religion articulates its relationship with the being. I would assume that African Christian theology is very specific to a study of Christianity as a theological entity. And you can do that for Islam, you can do that for traditional African thought. So that's the short, I'll let Jehu and Afe and other theologians tackle the other part. African theology, in as much as we want to say it's just we can use that term, I think we can't lump everything together. And yes, we have shared things that cut across different parts, different ages, different geographies. But for me, I like to focus on particularities, because even within the same location, and I was giving an example to my colleagues in one of the sessions, that even in one church, one congregation, you can find different takes on the same thing based on where they are. There are people who believe that there are multiple sources of healing in the same church. There are those who assume that there's only one source of healing. And so even in one congregation where people are congregated and they're listening to the same message, there are differences. So I like to assume that, yes, it is for convenience, we can have a lump sum terminology, but when you are hanging out, you find so many versions. But of course, we know in the art of writing, writing compels us to find certain ways of expressing reality that are not containable. And sometimes we are forced to go into that. On the colonial program, I would say the little that I know in terms of theological programs in the schools that I've visited is they are very much reflective of what curriculum and curricula were developed when the institutions were started or based on where they were trained. And I am convinced that much of theological programs, even in African urban centers, are more rural oriented. The kinds of ways in which they prepare students to think about theology tends to assume certain homogeneity, certain shared senses, whereas in urban areas there's flow and always it's fluid ways of interacting, not only with the faith, but also with the books. And you find there are many, many ways in which people are asking questions, and questions that are not being addressed in many of the programs, probably in our curriculum. For instance, when a student asks you as a scholar or as a teacher, yesterday we prayed for someone to get healed, and they went to the hospital and they were healed because they took medicine. And is it prayer that healed them or the medicine that healed them, or both? And that's not a simple question for these people because of the way they have been taught. Or they say we had a kesha. Kesha is an all-night prayer, binding all manner of issues, including deaths. And then they came out, and that early morning, there was a road accident that took 60 people. Was prayer not answered? How are they dealing with prayer? What is their agency here? And how do we prepare programs for students and their teachers and pastors to interpret those kinds of moments, because that's important for them. And how do you help students understand the power of the spirit world that maybe has been demonized, and yet traditionally they think it is very powerful, and they sometimes resort to that, and they feel like they need to understand how to navigate that terrain. There was an uproar on social media recently when somebody put out a fake note that Machakos University is teaching a degree in witchcraft. And they were getting all manner of backlash. They had to apologize to the public and say, no, it is not true. Why are they apologizing? Witchcraft is a subject matter. It is prevalent in this country. Why would they not find that in Africa International University? If the curriculum is really addressing issues that are very, very pertinent to Kenyans. I'll leave it there, but I know my colleagues who are more versed with this material can tell us. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mwenda, for that answer, and thank you also to all of the PAs who were part of this panel. Unfortunately, we've run out of time now, but there are some more comments and questions and so on in the chat, and I would encourage you to please look at that and respond to whatever is coming your way in a manner that works for you. But let me just take this moment to thank the PAs not only for what you've done here in this workshop, but for the continued work that you'll be doing for us in this project. So let's give them a hand and some applause.